Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dribble Drive podcast. Your hosts, Austin Render, Dalton Shetler with you here on episode 42, Tuesday, March 11th. We're recapping the Big Ten tournament. We are in that kind of awkward off week here for some Big Ten teams. We're going to talk about which teams need that off weekend more than others here in a little bit. But Dalton, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Austin. Thanks for setting us all up. I do got to apologize. I've had all kinds of tech issues. We hope we have a steady connection too throughout the podcast, but we'll see how this plays, right?
Look, I'm hearing you. I'm seeing you. That's the two-part equation. That's all. That's truly all we can ask for at this point. A reminder, we are available on Apple and Spotify podcasts. We are airing our episodes always live on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, so check us out there. And you can always check us out after the fact on that YouTube channel as well, brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Dalton, we got a lot to dive into. The champions, I guess, is where we should probably start. That's the UCLA Bruins. They finally knocked down Goliath, and that was USC. I think I at least went into all three matchups thinking that UCLA was going to win, which it's about time I got one right. But I don't know about you, and we could talk. I don't want to jump to USC. Just my quick observation was that I felt like USC was tired. USC had played two really tough games against Indiana and Michigan. UCLA played a tough one against Nebraska, but they're not like Nebraska doesn't play like a grind you down kind of style of basketball, whereas like Indiana and Michigan were really physical with USC. And then UCLA blows out Ohio State. And it felt like UCLA was the fresher team. They obviously got down early, but their legs were better late in that game. Very impressed by UCLA. Very impressed by Lauren Betts' second half and the way that she kind of took over. And good on Corey Close and her staff for the adjustments they had to make. When you watched this game, Dalton, what kind of stood out to you about what allowed UCLA to turn the tables?
I thought one of the big things was how fresh UCLA seemed, but I also was wildly impressed with UCLA's defense. We've been talking about that throughout the course of the season, how good they are defensively. I thought they were pretty strong in this one. And it's silly, Austin, because this team is ridiculously good. And we know that, right? They only lost 2 games all year, and they were both to USC. But USC's the other national champion contender, I would say. And I think in terms of national championship contenders, I think those are the two this conference has. And so heading into it, you're like, we haven't seen them win that game yet. And so now that they did, as silly as it sounds, it kind of felt like a confirmation stamp of, yes, this team can win it all. Even though they've been that good, just the win itself kind of eased things that way or framed things that way, I think, for the Bruins.
Yeah, no doubt. And I know you and I were texting as the game was going on, like, okay, if UCLA wins this, like who's the MVP? Because it was not a great first half for Lauren Betts. It wasn't an exceptional semifinal, but she didn't have to play a whole lot against Ohio State. She did have a terrific double-double, 28-13 against Nebraska. So you give her the nod, but eventually she got going, and she finished the game with 17 points, had 4 blocks, 7 of 10 from the floor. But to me, the real key in this run for UCLA was London Jones and knocking down three-pointers. She was 3 of 4 in this game. She hit 6 threes against Ohio State. That's when this team is the scariest that we saw back in November and December and January, is when you put Lauren Betts in the middle and you surround her with shooters. And London Jones and Tamia Gardner are those best shooters. And they combined to go 6 of 12 from the three-point line. They got 2 of 2 from Angela Dugalich, who I think might be the biggest X factor on this UCLA team.
I think that's fair.
She's a player that has WNBA potential and talent. Scouts are always looking at her and her game. She's a very all-around game. She can't go quiet, though. They need her to be a part of this offense. They got her to knock down a couple of threes, only 2 shot attempts in this game, didn't play a whole lot. But I just am really impressed by her, the three-point shooting of UCLA, because that's when this team is at their best. They were 8 of 15, didn't make a ton, but they made them when they mattered, and they got on some runs. They made a few consecutively, And again, it's the Purdue basketball model that they did last year on the men's side. You put Lauren Betts, Zach Edey in the middle. You surround her with playmakers and shooters like Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. And on the UCLA side, it's London Jones, it's Kiki Rice, it's Angela Dugalich. And all of a sudden, how do you defend UCLA? You have to pick your poison. You got to say, are we going to run them off the 3-point line and try and just let Lauren Betts beat us? Or are we going to try and make Lauren Betts' life difficult and allow them to hit open shots? USC had kind of gone the latter. They had gone, let's swarm Lauren Betts, make it really difficult on them, and it had worked. It did not work in Indianapolis in the second half. I think their legs got a little tired. They were chasing people around. UCLA was getting out and running. Their defense was pretty good in this game, holding USC to 67. And it's hard to beat a team 3 times in one season, Dalton. And this may not be the last time we see these two teams play. Who knows? There could be a national championship matchup that features the LA schools. It's not unreal to think about that possibility. I think we're all hopeful that they're 2-3 in Spokane and they don't play each other until the national championship. That would be great. But just two teams that I think they know each other so well. They made a lot of out of the fact that they're very closely located to each other on the broadcast. They talked about that a lot. But happy for Corey Close and UCLA. And for USC, I don't think there's anybody who comes out of this game worried. But again, it's what we've talked about all season, Dalton. You get 29 from Juju. You get 10 from Iria Fenn, who had a great tournament, but was a little bit slow in this one. And then elsewhere, it's 8 from Avery Howell. It's 8 from Talia von Oelhoffen. But when this team doesn't get the others going, they struggle. 29 for Juju. And what is that? If I do quick math, 38 for the rest of the team. So that's where this team's going to struggle, is if they put too much pressure on Juju.
No, I think that's completely fair. And I think we've come to expect that Juju is going to be Juju. Like, I think they showed a graphic during the tournament that I think only, 3 to 5 games this year has she not scored 20 points in. I mean, she has been absolutely unbelievable, and we all expect that with the NCAA tournament. I wanted to circle back for a moment, too. Somebody we could also toss into that list for UCLA at times is Gabriela Jaquez.
Yeah.
I think at times she's one of those outside players, too, that can be a little bit maybe of an under-the-radar X factor. But I also love, too, because you talk about the Purdue men's basketball style, Austin, and hanging around with Michigan State head women's basketball coach Robin Freilich. She often says, I may not be good at math, but I can do basketball math. And basketball math is creating a numbers advantage. And that's what UCLA does on a night in, night out basis by, okay, do you want to double us? Well, we can kick it out. We can swing it around. We can hit some shots, so on and so forth. But I'm with you. I don't think anybody came out of that game thinking, oh, boy, what do we expect from USC in the NCAA tournament? I think that a lot of people are still pretty high on the Trojans at this point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I think USC comes out of it just fine. But again, I think for both of these teams, it's what do you, and that's the case with any great team. What do your role players do when March comes around? What do your X factors do when the tournament time is here? And I think that's a big thing for this team. Looks like we might have lost Dalton. He's had some technical issues, but I do want to know, I believe Gabriela Jaquez was a little under the weather in that tournament, played through it, but didn't have a huge effect. I think he's right, though, that she is a big part of this UCLA team moving forward. But USC, Kiki Iriafen is so big to how this team works. And I think we got him back now. Dalton is back. Can you hear us? Oh, he's lagging.
I got you for the moment, at least.
Okay. You're lagging quite a bit, but we'll try and we'll see if we can work through it. I don't know if you can hear us real time or not, but just talking about Kiki Iriafen and the impact that she makes on this USC team. I saw it firsthand in the quarterfinal. This team is impossible to beat when you're going to get double doubles from Juju Watkins and Kiki Iriafen in the same game. It's going to be like, it's just not, you have to be a superpower of a team to be able to beat USC when they have both Juju and Kiki on. Indiana and Michigan were not superpower teams. They're very good teams, and they had great game plans, and they played very well, and they played very hard. And that can only get you so far when the stars of the team put up the numbers that they did. Kiki Iriafen was sensational in back-to-back games. Just kind of looking at her numbers. Against Indiana, she goes 21-10. And then against Michigan, she had another really good game as well, going 25-11. So, again, if you're going to get that performance from Kiki Iriafen, then you're in trouble. And anybody's in trouble if you're going to play Kiki Iriafen and she's going to put those numbers up. But again, in the final against UCLA, 10 points, 5 boards. So if you get that kind of performance from Kiki Iriafen, and a lot more of the load goes to Juju Watkins, who appeared to be tired. It's 3 games in 3 days. And not only is it 3 games in 3 days for somebody like Juju Watkins, but she's being sent doubles and triples on every possession. So think about somebody's normal wear and tear playing a typical basketball game 3 days in a row. Then you add in the fact that Juju barely sits on the bench. Usually will play 38 to 40 minutes. And then is being hounded by 2 to 3 defenders every time she takes the ball down the floor. And that'll wear on you. And so by game 3 of 3 days, it did appear to wear on Juju Watkins. The nice thing about an NCAA tournament setting is that you're going to have the day off in between each game. You're going to have time in between the 2 rounds. So I think that's important going forward. New location for Dalton Shetler. He's coming out of a different bullpen this time. Can you hear me, Dalton?
I think I got you right now.
I got you. Yeah. I think we're okay. No, he's shaking his head.
I'm running out of options too.
It's making me think it's on my end, but I'm not getting the little Wi-Fi signal on. But we'll keep going on here. As we look at Lauren Betts was named the Big Ten tournament MVP. The all-tournament team featured Juju Watkins, Lauren Betts, Kiki Iriafen, Silas Swords, and Lucy Olson as the 5 to make out the team. I'll be transparent. Lucy Olson was not on my list. I put Yarden Garzone down, going toe-to-toe with Juju Watkins in that Friday morning quarterfinal. Felt worthy of being included on that list. She made 9 threes over a pair of games in the tournament. Personally, I felt like in the magnitude of the game against USC, she came to play. I felt like she should have been on the all-tournament team, but that was just my thought process on that. I thought Silas Swords was terrific. She had 26 in their loss to USC, certainly deserved to be on there. And Betts, Iriafen, and Watkins go without saying. But that's kind of the top of the Big Ten tournament bracket. The 1 seed getting beat by the 2 seed. I think we had laid out these scenarios of what if the LA schools come and they're not as invested and maybe they don't want to win this thing. UCLA wanted to win this. I mean, it was clear by their reactions post-game. It was clear by the way they played. That was a motivated team. And that was my thought is, okay, maybe it's not both of them, but maybe it's whoever wins the regular season that doesn't have the same aggressive mindset. And that I think that showed a little bit on Sunday that USC had already won the regular season title. They're already going to be a 1 seed. Not surprising that UCLA was the one that came out a little bit hungrier in Sunday's game. Was a little surprised, and if we ever get Dalton back, I'm curious if he had the same shock as me. Was a little surprised at the fact that it was UCLA jumping all the way to number 1 in the rankings. This is obviously it's not, AP poll doesn't determine the bracket on Sunday, but UCLA jumped up 3 spots to number 1. South Carolina also jumped up 3 spots with their blowout win over Texas. So they go up kind of hand in hand from 4 and 5 to 1 and 2, jumping UConn, who did win the Big East, but didn't really play anybody en route to that title. They did beat a ranked Creighton team by 20 in the championship game. So UConn hangs in there at third. They were receiving 7 votes for first place. USC drops down 2 spots from 2 to 4, and Texas was the number 1 team. They dropped from number 1 to number 4. TCU and Duke rise up with their conference championships up to 6 and 7. He's in the car now. I hope he's not driving, but he's in the car.
We could play a fun game of like Where's Waldo, but Dalton version, where I just jump in with a different background. I'm in a different spot every time.
Where's Dalton now?
I think I actually have better service in the car, so I'll just sit here.
You're coming through loud and clear, so we're going to roll with that. I was just talking about UCLA jumping to number 1. Was a little bit surprised by that. I don't know if I have a better option looking at the rankings, but I saw it yesterday and I was like, oh, all right, number 1. Because it does feel like we work in a recency bias society where like USC has still beaten UCLA twice. I wouldn't have really had any issue if USC stayed above UCLA. But the Bruins do jump to number 1. Charlie Cream, for what it's worth, still has South Carolina as his number 1 overall seed. That's not going to matter because they're going to go to the East Regional, which that is in Birmingham.
Yep.
And then UCLA and USC will both go to Spokane as the 2 and 3. So that's not the number 1 overall seed doesn't really impact in this. If it were UCLA versus USC and one of them has to go to Birmingham, one has to go to Spokane, then it might have been different. But it's not going to matter at all in that sense. Any other things you wanted to touch on with 1 versus 2 in the title game, or are you ready to move on to kind of some of the other implications of the tournament?
I'm good to move on. Let's talk about this tourney.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this tournament. So let's talk about the teams that I think helped themselves in this tournament, Dalton. And I think we start with Washington. Yep. I think they're firmly in with that win over Minnesota. I don't think they're going to escape the first 4. I think they're probably going to be a play-in team. Yep. And one thing you'll notice as we talk about this, the bracketology released this morning by Charlie Cream feels pretty final when it comes to a lot of the power conference teams because the power conference tournaments are done. There's going to be some smaller tournaments and some auto qualifiers that may change, maybe a bid stealer here or there. But for the most part, it does feel like if you're in the projection right now, it's probably not changing between now and Sunday for the at-large teams. Washington's in, and they did it with a pretty dominant win over Minnesota. That was their 5th straight win before falling to Michigan in a game that was tight for about 3 quarters. But I think they might have done the most good out of that trip to Indianapolis.
Oh, I think you're right. And it's funny, I saw Charlie Cream's on Sunday night bracketology. I haven't seen the one from this morning. And I think maybe was there a bid stealer coming out of the Sun Belt where James Madison lost in the title game to Arkansas State? James Madison, maybe with that record, they went undefeated in conference play all season. Maybe they're hanging out there on the bubble. I'd be curious. I could see you're typing away at it. But
they are first 4 out.
Okay.
They are not in the field as it stands.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. All of this, as you know, it's just March and it becomes a lot of fun. But the other team that stood out to me, because I'm with you, I think Washington put it in cement with what they were able to do in that tournament. I thought the other one that really helped themselves out was Iowa with that win over Michigan State. Charlie Cream, at least as of Sunday night, I didn't know he released one today. So hopefully it's still true for this point. But a 6 seed, he had the Hawkeyes at least on Sunday night.
Yep.
In Austin, especially with this NCAA tournament, if you're a team that's trying to make a second weekend, if you get to a 6 or better, your chances increase by a pretty dramatic amount. Instead of being a 7 seed where you hope to beat the 10 in the opening game, and then you take on a 2, which could be anybody from TCU to some of these SEC schools.
UConn.
Yes.
Notre Dame. I mean, the 2 line is loaded, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. But you're right. Getting up to that 6 is big.
Yeah. If you get to a 6, that helps your trajectory to maybe make a second weekend immensely. So I think Iowa getting away from a 7-10 or even making sure they're away from an 8-9 and maybe jumping up to a 6, that besides Washington just ensuring that they make it, that was the other one that stood out to me as maybe the most helpful.
Yeah, and again, this is not the bracket. We're going to get the bracket on Sunday, but in the projection release this morning, Washington's in the play-in against Harvard. They're the second to last team in the field. So Washington's hoping that there aren't any other bid stealers. I don't think there's a ton of bid stealers on the women's side with how the mid-majors have struggled this year to have those types of at-large resumes. So I think they're going to be okay. They would play Harvard in the opener, and then they would match up with a 6th seed in Florida State in the Baton Rouge regional. So that would be Washington's route. Iowa's in this hypothetical bracket is in the Durham regional with their 3 seed being Duke. The 6th seed Hawkeyes would play Fairfield out of the MAAC conference. They call it the MAC, but I'm a Midwest guy, so I can't call it the MAC.
I like that.
There's only one MAC, all right? There can't be two. You have to be the MAAC.
I like the sheep telling you what conference it's from.
Exactly. We played Fairfield last year, and I was like, I can't call this the MAC. That just doesn't feel right. So we'll see. It's the Stags that would be the matchup against Iowa in this hypothetical bracket. But you're right. Playing up to a 6 is big. Michigan, I think, did themselves some good in making sure they didn't fall into the 8-9. They are a 7 right now, according to Charlie Cream. What a game that Michigan-Maryland game was. My head was spinning watching that first half. I'm sitting next to Matt Park, who's the voice of Michigan women's basketball, and he's having the time of his life calling that first quarter, first 12 minutes of the game. And then all of a sudden, you could just feel it. And Sarah Tibiasu kind of spearheaded the charge. And all of a sudden, Maryland's getting steals. They're getting and ones. They're hitting threes. And it's a 1-point game. It was a 27-point lead, trimmed to 1 in a half.
Yep.
It was a 4-point lead at halftime. Third quarter, Michigan took control back, but it still was hanging there. And they just put it away in the fourth quarter. And a really impressive performance by Michigan. We'll talk about the other side of it because I think Maryland, one of the teams that hurt themselves in this tournament. But Michigan, I think staying out of the 8-9 is big because I know we talk about getting to the 6 is big. I think just avoiding the 8-9 is big as well. As it stands, Michigan would be heading to the Raleigh regional against NC State, who just lost the ACC final to Duke. They would match up with a 10-seed play-in of Iowa State and Princeton. The play-in is going to have a real Ivy League feel to it with the way Charlie Cream has it with Princeton and Harvard in it. So I think they did a lot of good. I don't really know any – like Indiana, I think, made sure they weren't in the play-in by winning that game against Oregon, which is helpful. I think Nebraska made sure they're not in the play-in by going on a run and winning a couple of games. On the flip side, Dalton, I think Charlie Cream still has Ohio State as a hosting school. Hanging in there. They're a 4 right now. I was honestly a little surprised by that. I thought maybe they would lose that by falling to Iowa, but as it stands, and I think
falling to UCLA.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. But I think he's right in the sense that, like, sometimes I find myself in the boat of overreacting to conference tournaments. The committee tends not to. And so I think it's fair. Ohio State's body of work, they're a 4. The team that really damaged themselves this week, though, I think was Maryland. Had a chance if they could have gone on a run. They probably would have needed to beat USC. But had they gotten to the championship game, they could have potentially made themselves a hosting school. Instead, they bow out in the opener. Cheyenne Sellers had 2 points in this game against Michigan, which was really surprising. 1 of 3 from the floor. The freshmen, Swords and Olsen, combined for 42. And as we said, it was a wild game. But on the Maryland side, I don't know what to make of them, Dalton, because they got Saylor Poffenbarger back, so it was a bit more of a full roster. And they have these moments where you think they're a top 4 seed, and then they have these moments where you're like, what did I just watch? And that was that second half and really 3 of the 4 quarters against Michigan.
No, and I agree. And we've seen that throughout the season. They just seem to be fairly Jekyll and Hyde. And they're not the only one guilty of this. I think the team that I talk about a lot, Michigan State, is a little bit Jekyll and Hyde. They've got some of this too, where some games they show up and you're like, there's all that talent. And then other times, like for Maryland, they've had a couple of games where they score 65 points. And you kind of scratch your head. You wonder what's going on there. I think there's no doubt about it. This team is talented, can certainly make a run to the second weekend of an NCAA tournament, but it becomes hard to depend on that.
Yep.
And I think what we saw in that game against Michigan just kind of represents or embodies that even more.
I don't know much about Alabama women's basketball. If they play in any sort of style like the men, I don't know if they get up and down the floor. If they do, they're the 5 seed in the Ohio State region. Can you imagine the ping-ponging of that if we've got another high-level team playing against the Ohio State press? That would be very interesting.
Well, and I saw
you saw Alabama, right?
Yes, I did see Alabama earlier this year. That was actually the first loss of the season for Michigan State. Now, that tournament also was set up interesting, where Michigan State was playing its second game in 2 days and Alabama was playing its first game against Michigan State, but neither here nor there. I'll just stash that away in a grievances folder. But nonetheless, no, Alabama is a very talented team, athletic, has good size. That will be a wonderful matchup if that comes to fruition. Like that's a good tied team.
That'd be a lot of fun. For what it's worth, the 12 seed would be Missouri State, the 13 seed Green Bay. Again, these are hypothetical brackets we're talking about here. Maryland, a 5 seed, they would go to the Chapel Hill region against North Carolina. The 12 seed against Maryland would be Florida Gulf Coast, which they were in Bloomington last year. Was that last year? That might have been 2 years ago. But man, that's a good basketball team. That's a mid-major that year in and year out is a part of this tournament. And then Ball State, the 13 seed, they're having a great year in the MAC. So chirp to our friends up in Muncie. Michigan State would be sent to the Norman region against Oklahoma, which, boy, we saw them last year, knew they were going to return a lot of talent. They added Reagan Beers from Oregon State. That is a really, really good basketball team. So that would be a fun matchup there for us neutrals, certainly, who get to watch that one. UNLV would be Michigan State's 11 seed in that hypothetical bracket. Moving down, another team I think hurt itself because I think they had a chance here, Dalton, to get out of the dreaded 8-9, and that's Illinois. Illinois with their 4th consecutive loss to finish the season heading into the NCAA tournament. They lost to both LA schools. They lose at home to Michigan, and they're one and done in Indy with a loss to Nebraska. They're now an 8 seed in the Austin Regional against Texas with the 9 seed Richmond. That's tough.
And
that's
Richmond's tough. Like, that's a tough opening game.
Richmond, yeah, they're going to get everything. And again, I don't want to pat myself on the back here, but we have been wondering all season, how long can this sustain for Illinois? And I don't necessarily think it's anybody's fault, but they're playing 6 people. That is just where we're at with Illinois at this point. And in that game against Nebraska, both Kendall Bostic and Adalia McKenzie played all 40 minutes of that game. Kendall Bostic hasn't sat in months, it feels like. She's just playing 40 minutes after 40 minutes after 40 minutes. And at some point, that's going to wear you down. And I think it did. Nebraska really got to him there at the end of the game. And there was a scare where Genesis Bryant went down with the ankle injury in the first quarter. She did come back in. But Illinois is probably toward the top of the needs this 2-week break very badly right now to rest those legs a little bit. And but I thought had they won that game, they would have gone up. They would have played UCLA. That would probably have been tough either way, but who knows? Maybe one win would have been enough to get Illinois off the 8-9. You never know how close those margins are, but I feel like they're going to find themselves in that 8-9 matchup.
Well, and Illinois is a team, really steaming up in this car. It's all
roll down a window or something.
I know, just crack a door. All these hot takes. So if anybody's walking by the parking lot, they're going to get a nice little free show. But no, for Illinois, one of the things too that you mentioned, the Genesis Bryant injury, I remember seeing it, and of course, every time one of those happens, right, the arena hushes and everything gets pretty quiet, everything gets pretty tense. And there was an Illinois fan a few rows back from me that just shouted out, "No, we need you." And I was thinking, like, that's exactly kind of how this feels. Like, that team is trying its best to keep it together to the finish line, it feels like. And as you said, not to any point or any fault of anybody there. It's just a really injured team without Dolan and all the other pieces, Cook. It's kind of hard. But the team who I think might have hurt itself the most, and maybe this is just pretty cut and dry, it's Minnesota.
Yeah.
I thought Minnesota had a chance to be an NCAA tournament team. Charlie Cream now has them out. And now
quite a bit out, too.
Yeah. And has the Big Ten down to 12 bids now for the NCAA tournament. I thought that was a winnable game for Minnesota. I didn't feel like they showed up like you kind of expected. I thought there was more in the tank for them.
Yeah, it was not a very good game. They made a run there in the second quarter to turn the deficit, I believe, to 2 by halftime, and then it really got away from them in the second half. And what Washington does is they shoot a very high percentage from the floor. That's just what Washington is. They're very efficient offensively. They shot 55% in this game. And they're very similar to, there's a couple teams in the conference like this: Indiana, Washington, and Nebraska. If they're going to make threes, they're going to be really difficult to beat.
Ohio State's that way on the good side.
That's true, yeah. I think Ohio State has a few other ways to win.
Yes.
These teams feel like they've got to make those threes to win games. Fair. And Washington made 10, shot 42%, compared to Minnesota shooting 26% from three and only 39% in total. And yeah, just as good as it was for Washington, this kind of felt like a play-in game. And Minnesota does not get it done. They limp down the stretch as well. I think they lost their final 4. And if you take what Charlie Cream has said, they're going to be on the outside looking in again this year. They're the 4th team out. You mentioned the James Madison bid Steelers, so they're in front of Minnesota, still out, but in front of them. Then there's St. Joe's and Virginia Tech, who make out the first 4. So it's not as if, Minnesota just needs a coin flip to go their way on Selection Sunday. They're from the prognostication of the top bracketologists in our sport, they are not even knocking on the door. So that's a really tough finish to the year. That's a great call out by you. I had kind of glossed over that one, that is a really big hurt yourself moment. Oregon is right on the edge of play-in.
Okay.
They are struggling right now. I don't feel like they're playing great basketball. Indiana kind of took it to them. Charlie Cream has them as the last team receiving a bye into the field. They are an 10 seed in the Storrs, Connecticut regional. They would play Louisville, and if they got out, they play UConn, which nobody's signing up for that in the month of March by any means. But we'll see. The last 4 receiving byes is once again a Big Ten filled category of Oregon, Nebraska, Indiana. I think they're all going to get it. Oregon's the one that might end up flipping into that play-in game because of kind of the way they fell down the stretch of the season. But Nebraska getting the upset win over Illinois, Indiana dominating Oregon the way they did. I think both teams will be just fine. Boy, I tell you what, though, Indiana really could have had something there in that USC game. But you look at the Charlie Cream logic. Had they won that game, they might have jumped into the 8-9, and they might have been in a Texas regional or a South Carolina regional. And I don't think that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
As it stands, Indiana would be in the Fort Worth region against TCU, which if you ranked seeds 1 through 8, which they do, that would be the last 2 seed would be TCU. Yep. So if you're going to play somebody, that's probably the best option if you have to be in the 1-2. Baylor gave them all they could handle, and Indiana they beat Baylor this year. So if you're playing transitive property, Indiana would be right there. Obviously, that's not how basketball or any sport works by any means. But the tougher one to me, not tougher, but Vandy would be Indiana's opening round matchup. And my gosh, are they playing? So they have one of the best freshmen in the country, and Michaela Blake's 2 50-plus point games this year. So that would be that'd be a tall task for a 7-10 matchup there for the Hoosiers.
That's another team I had a chance to see earlier this year.
That's right.
Michigan State beat Vanderbilt for the.
She did not put up 50 in that game.
Did not put up and that's what. And I remember walking away. I'm like, yeah, she's pretty talented. But when she scored 50 the other week, a couple of times ago, the first time, I was like, really? And then she did it again. I'm like, wow, we must have had a pretty good day defensively to keep her in check.
Yeah.
But they also have a former Big Ten player, Leilani Kapanis, is on that Vanderbilt team. And they are a really good squad coached by Shea Ralph, who, of course, comes from the Geno tree at UConn. Mm-hmm. Highly disciplined. It's a tough team. They gave Michigan State all they could handle when Michigan State was probably playing its best ball of the season. Was that Thanksgiving trip?
Yeah, that's a really good Vanderbilt team. So Indiana would have to have their themselves ready. Yep. Let's talk. So we said Illinois needs this break. Who else do you think is going to benefit most from a 2-week kind of reset here? An opportunity to work on yourselves here for 2 weeks, get some rest. Whether you think it benefits them simply from the time off, or I think that's the Illinois side of it, or it benefits them from, okay, we haven't been playing great basketball. Let's fix some things here. Who do you think that kind of fits into that mold?
Well, and I don't mean to make this self-centered, but I think it's Michigan State.
Yeah, it would have been one of my answers too. Yeah,
I think them getting a chance to come back and really look in the mirror, reevaluate some things, and then attack the week ahead and get ready for it. I feel like that's a team that right now, like what you saw in the Big Ten tournament from them against Iowa, it's just not their best basketball. It was sloppy, 24, 25 turnovers. This team is capable of so much more. I mean, I'm not saying anything the players and the staff doesn't know. I mean, there's a belief that this team can be pretty successful in the NCAA tournament, but you can't play like you did against Iowa in the Big Ten tournament and reach that. So I think this comes at a nice time for Michigan State to kind of hit the reset button, where as like a team like Iowa, I think this is at the worst time. I think Iowa, if they could play a game every single day right now because they're so hot, like I think that's what you would want to do. I think Michigan State's on that end. Maybe not bad for Maryland to come back and readdress some things. I think some of it, though, we talk about, like, for Michigan State's sake, they are very capable, and we've seen what they can be, right? In the championship win against Vanderbilt, we've seen what they can do. I mean, throughout the Big Ten season where they tied for 5th place, we know the potential there. Maryland, we are a little bit more just curious of, because ever since they lost Bree McDaniel and Sellers went through her little roller coaster of injuries, it just feels like you kind of flip a coin and see what kind of Terps team shows up. So maybe this helps them, but it's kind of maybe the path to consistency feels more aloof for Maryland, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, there's no better illustration of it than their last 2 games. They beat Ohio State in a thriller in overtime in the regular season finale, and then they get run out of the building by Michigan. So just a team that's been tough to figure out. I think Iowa is at the top of the list of people who this is going to hurt the most, or maybe not hurt, but would like to keep playing basketball this week. I think Michigan's in that conversation as well.
Yes, agreed.
They're playing some great basketball right now. Now, I stand by it. Those freshmen are scared of nobody. They are not going to back down, and that's a team that is if they're my 6 or 7 seed, I'm like, ooh, okay, I got to deal with these guys. Like, give Kim Barnes-Arico a ton of credit for what she's done with that team. They had USC. They were there. And I think they got tired of the second half, or really the fourth quarter. And again, like I was saying when you were gone, like the will and the effort can take you somewhere in a game of basketball, but against a team like USC, it can't get you over the edge. You have to still execute. You still have to make those plays. And Indiana and Michigan both played so hard in those games. And I think both played very well.
Yep.
But again, when you're getting double-doubles from Juju Watkins and Kiki Iriafen in the same game, it's going to be very difficult to win that game. And both of them found it that way. But I think both of those teams, Indiana and Michigan, coached by two long-time, very successful coaches, are going to have a really good game. But that's where not as worried about Michigan, because you're giving Kim Barnes-Arico now 2 weeks to fix some things within her team and then a week to figure out an opponent, and they're going to have a really good game plan set up. I think Indiana will as well. We have so many. We talked about this at the tournament when we all met. We have so many good coaches in this league.
Yeah.
So many. And that's why I think there is a capability of some teams to go on a run. This was the number I posed at you and some of our other broadcasters. 3.5 over under on teams that make a run to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. It seems low, but you're looking at 3 hosting schools. It's not all that often in women's basketball that teams that don't host get out. It takes a really good performance. It's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It happens every year. There's always a couple. But let's say, and I was saying 3.5 because I didn't think Ohio State was going to host.
Right.
But I still don't know if Ohio State's like a shoe-in to get out. I mean, they didn't get out last year as a 2 seed. And think about the last 2 years, Indiana and Ohio State have been top 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament and haven't gotten out of their own regionals.
Yep.
So it's not an automatic shoe-in. I think we both feel pretty good about LA schools getting out. But then you throw in the group of the rest, which is 10 other teams in this league. Can 2 of them get out of the opening weekend? I would say yes. I think there's enough good coaches in this league. Somebody gets the right matchup on the road and they can make it happen. I have too much faith in this conference to think that 3 or fewer teams are going to get to the Sweet 16.
So I'm with you, but I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I think we both like LA, both the LA schools, UCLA and USC. What other teams does the Big Ten have that are not involved in 8, 9, 7, 10 games? Because, I mean, if we're just playing chalk and kind of playing tradition, you imagine the 1s and 2s move on. And of course, USC and UCLA are part of that. But outside of that, you have Ohio State as a 4. You have Maryland as a 5. Yep. You have Michigan State and Iowa as your 6s.
Michigan State and Iowa 6s. Yep.
So let's say, just for thumbnail purposes, let's say 7 through 10 seeds don't advance to a Sweet 16.
And we'll throw Washington in there as well as an 11.
Yeah. Yep. And again, that doesn't mean that I think your team's automatically out to anybody out there who is a fan of one of those teams, just thumbnail purposes.
But that's 6. That's half of them right there that are out.
And so then it becomes your 2 LA schools, Ohio State, Maryland, Michigan State, and Iowa. And to reach the 3.5 over, you would need 2 of those teams. From what we've seen from Ohio State, that game against UCLA, they got beat down in that one. The game against Iowa, I think they have enough talent against a team like Iowa where that shouldn't come down to an Iowa potential game winner. Like, I think Ohio State has more talent than what they've been playing up to. Yeah. Maryland, we've covered the inconsistencies for the Terps. Iowa's playing really good ball right now. They take 8, 9 days off. Curious to see what that looks like. And Michigan State has a week and a half to kind of reorganize itself. But 2 of those teams, if we're just doing this thumbnail purpose, we would need to advance to the Sweet 16 to hit the over, which when you put it that way, that makes it a little bit more challenging.
It really is. And well, you think about 2 years ago, and I don't know if the 1 seeds are. I think the 1 seeds are really darn good this year, and even most of the 2s. But you think about 2 years ago, Indiana, who had the Holmes injury, and Stanford both lost as 1 seeds in the second round. So it's not unheard of.
100%. You're right.
But I'm with you. If we're just doing simple hypothetical math,
where we don't even know the matchups yet.
Yeah, we have no idea. No idea whatsoever. You're saying the LA schools are in, that's 2. you need 2 more out of the other 10. So you're thinking, oh, well, statistically, that seems likely. But then you realize 6 of those other 10 are 7 through 11 seeds.
Yep.
And of the other 4, we have no idea what form of that team we're going to get on a night in, night out basis. So you're right. It's going to be interesting. I don't foresee, as good as this league has been, more than like 5 schools getting through to the second weekend. We'll talk about this more next week when we have brackets, but it does feel like, man, something's going to have to happen that's crazy. But again, we've got a lot of good coaches in this league, and you're going to give Kim Barnes-Arico a chance at a 2 seed. You might give Terry Moore a chance at a 2 seed. Like, to me, that's not out of the question. It would have to be the right matchup, and shots have got to fall. But, and I've always said this, I said this last year, and it was a reason that I didn't think Indiana would beat South Carolina, but it was a reason I felt like they had a shot, was because when you're one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country, which Indiana was number 1 last year, you can get hot, and all of a sudden you're in a game. And that's what happened last year, is Indiana almost beat South Carolina. Sidney Parrish started knocking down threes, and all of a sudden that game was tight. Indiana has that capability still this year. I believe they're top 20 in the country in 3-point shooting. They could still, I mean, that's a team you get scared of in a tournament setting, is what if Darden Garzone, like she did against USC, starts banking in corner threes, and
that was silly.
Which I think that was the basketball gods giving her one back, because the 3 right before it was 3/4 of the way in that rim. I have no idea how it came out. But we evened out with a banked in 3 from the corner. But she's the type of player that's a microwave. And as soon as she sees one go in as an opponent, you go, oh, crap. Because she has some separation moves. Now, she's not the quickest driver to the basket, but she has some good handles to where she can create just a bit of separation. And then she's 6'3". And so if she's got that separation on a smaller guard, she can get those shots off. Now, what can give her trouble is when you put a Juju Watkins or a Kennedy Smith on her, who is a 6'2", 6'3" guard that can match the wingspan. Then it gets a little bit tricky. But she was terrific against USC. One of the big reasons Indiana hung around in that game was she was knocking down big threes. So I'm giving the Indiana case here, and I'll probably give it again next week, of like, if you're going to get that, Shea Chesky's playing great basketball right now. So you combine those two who can get red hot in a second. I'm not going to just sit here and say there's 0 chance that these teams get out. Illinois is a great 3-point shooting team too. So maybe they get hot. Nebraska, the same thing. So, but I'm with you. I think the logic would say it's going to be really hard to get 4 teams into the Sweet 16. It's hard to get 4 teams into the Sweet 16 anyway. That's a fourth of the league. That's a fourth of the tournament. But when you're getting 12 teams in the tournament, you're thinking we could get a third of our teams through. Not necessarily a shoe-in right now.
Well, and it'll be fun to talk about next week when we know the matchups a little bit more. But I think one of the things to pay attention to, and as you start to think about, like, Austin, you hit a great point. Teams with wide variance, those are the teams that can change their ceiling and can get hot from 3. They can do different things, and Indiana fits that mold. And I think, too, when you mention you don't just count Indiana out right now, and I certainly don't either, or really with many of these teams that are going to be Big Ten seeded S through 11, S7 through 11 in the NCAA tournament. Look how they've pushed the LA schools throughout this year, some different teams. Iowa beat USC. They played UCLA down to the wire. Michigan State, a controversial ending at UCLA. Against USC, they lost by single digits when they shot 1 of 13 from 3. You've got a lot of these teams. Indiana just pushed USC in the Big Ten tournament, as did Michigan. Even these 7 through 11 seeded, potentially NCAA tournament teams from the Big Ten, they have pushed what would be 1s and 2s that they would face in the second round, theoretically, throughout the course of the season. And I think that's worth noting, that they've got this experience because this league is so dang tough, that they've got the experience and they've had to take on this kind of challenge before.
It is funny. You think about, oh, crap, we're going to have to face Texas or UConn or Notre Dame. But then you're like, wait, USC and UCLA are 1 seeds too, and
Yep.
my fill in the blank team gave them a run. In my case, Indiana gave USC a run twice this season. So it shouldn't be out of the realm that they couldn't give TCU a run. Now, neither one of those were at USC. This would be at TCU in this hypothetical bracket. This is the best part of March, though, Dalton, that we can just sit here and play hypothetical bracket talk. Next week will be even better because we're going to have a real physical bracket in our hands. I'm one that prints them. I need it in my hands. I cannot wait for this. We might, I think we should start a dribble drive tournament challenge is what we should do. People can join that. I think we'll definitely have to cook something up there. But we'll see. A good question from one of our listeners, Mike. He asked, Iowa really benefits from a home crowd. They were strongly represented in Indianapolis as well. Can they take that to a tournament site if it's Midwestern? Yes, but you are only allotted a certain amount of tickets for your school in a road regional. The rest become available to the home team. Now, can you get them off the secondary market? Sure. And Iowa fans will.
Yes, they will.
But in this, let's say this projected bracket, Durham, North Carolina, not exactly Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, a 3 seed. Let's see if there's any like 3 seeds in the Midwest. LSU, no. Kentucky, if they were to get into that regional, I could see them swarming there. Oklahoma, absolutely.
Yeah.
If they were to somehow get into the Norman regional, they could absolutely take that place over. Good question, though, because that fan base does travel maybe better than any in women's basketball. And Iowa does benefit at home from that. So can they take that play on the road without the crowd will be a big question. Let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? We should touch on, and Dalton and I are not going to sit here and guess on replacements, but we should touch on Marissa Mosley, is out as the Wisconsin head coach. She stepped down. I believe that was Sunday that was announced. So Wisconsin will be looking for a new head coach. Will also be interesting to see where some of these players will they stay or go. That's obviously a big thing when you get a coaching change. So Sarah Williams, for example, would be a hot commodity in the transfer portal if she goes, and would also be a wonderful building piece for whoever takes the job. So what she decides to do could be pretty important for that program moving forward, but they are in search of a new head coach. We'll obviously update as that gets finalized. Dalton and I are not going to sit here and just guess on who's going to take that job, but we will talk about it when it is official. But just wanted to make sure that was out there, that Wisconsin is the first team and right now the only team expected to make a change. I did see there were reports that Katie Gerald is expected to be back at Purdue. Not a big surprise there, to sign an extension. She's got a young team that I think could do some growing next year and be much better. So I don't think anybody's surprised by that one. Any lasting memories, moments for you from Indianapolis? I always enjoy our time there, getting to see everybody. And I always say you win a game in the tournament, you feel like you were a part of it. That's the fun part of it. I know you only got one game, but you were there for a couple of days. So any lasting memories for you from the Big Ten tournament?
Well, the big thing, I think, and I was telling this to some people I know that are actually heading down to the men's tournament in Indianapolis, and it's their first time ever. They kind of were asking questions, and I was explaining, look, I don't know what the value in this really is for teams at the Power 5 level. Like at mid-majors, it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because you're fighting for your postseason life in these things. But at the Power 5 level or the Big Ten level, I just see it as one of the greatest spectator events that you could possibly go to. As a fan, it is so much fun to just sit there and watch basketball from sun up to sundown. And I think this tournament delivered in every sense of the way with it. I didn't catch a ton of the UCLA-Nebraska game because Lil Red was in the tunnel right next to me, and I was staring at Lil Red the entire time.
He's fascinating. He's my favorite mascot in this league. So I'm at dinner, and Dalton's sending me videos and pictures of Lil Red. This is how good our relationship has gotten, that Dalton knows that I need a live feed of Little Red, like de-inflating his head and popping it up, and he's waggling the hands around. Like, that guy's awesome. He is absolutely elite. Anyway, continue.
I was just so distracted by it. And the video I sent you was great too, because like it's just a layup on the far side and it quickly pans to Little Red. Just, I don't even know, gyrating, I guess, just like inexplicably so happy.
Well, I texted you and I was like, because I'm at dinner with my family and I'm not watching the UCLA Nebraska game. And I'm like, how is Nebraska hanging in there? And you go, I don't know. I'm too focused on Little Red.
Little Red has all my attention right now. And then it was followed up the next halftime for Iowa and Ohio State was Red Panda. So I tell you what, hanging out in that tunnel, yeah, there's a lot of star power in that tunnel.
That is big time.
Back to the previous question, I just think the Big Ten tournament is such a fun fan spectator event. I don't think it hurt too many people outside of I mean, we touched on some teams that maybe it hurts their seeding. Minnesota, it certainly, they gave them an opportunity though, and they just couldn't capitalize on it. I think overall, it's just a fun way to celebrate what is a grind of an 18-game season and 18 league or 18-team league. And it was great to see a championship game too between the two best teams, and you got to see a comeback in it too, where you thought maybe UCLA was put away. They come back into it, they win it. I thought all of it felt pretty poetic, and it was a really enjoyable week.
Yeah, no doubt. It's just fun to have that basketball, like you said, from noon to midnight almost. You get this basketball. It's a lot of fun, and we get to spend it with a lot of good friends too. Just nice to have all the broadcasters in one spot, which is getting harder to do with all these games happening at different times. But we had a great time on Wednesday with some of the folks that stopped by. And just a ton of fun. And the Iowa-Ohio State game was awesome. That was kind of the biggest like thriller of the tournament. The championship game delivered. Indiana USC, Michigan USC were both really good games into the fourth quarter. You mentioned the Nebraska UCLA game as well. So some awesome games that really did deliver. And I think we thought, what if for some of these teams? It's kind of the same situation we think with the NCAA tournament. Like, what if some of these teams make a run? Ultimately, it ended up being 1 versus 2 and a really, really good championship game on Sunday afternoon. So the next time we talk, we'll have brackets in our hands. This is going to be awesome. Dalton and I are going to be hitting the road. I'm hopeful that I think we'll still be able to do a Tuesday pod, maybe. We'll keep you. Well, I don't think we're traveling on Tuesday. I think we would probably travel Wednesday. So this is new for me. We have not traveled.
Oh, you've been hosting. That's right.
Yeah, I've never not hosted. So this will be new, but it'll be fun. Always fun to go check out new places. Fort Worth would be fun. So that'd be a cool spot to be. If you're in Norman and I'm in Fort Worth, we're not that far away, right?
Oh yeah, maybe it's a Thursday, Friday deal too, where we could just road trip back and forth, dribble drive.
I'm sure people from Texas and Oklahoma are laughing at us right now at how far away those two places are from each other. But anyway, we'll put out on social on the X channel about the bracket challenge. We'll definitely make one of those. Join us. We'll promote it again on Tuesday. We appreciate those of you who have joined us live. If you're listening on podcast, we appreciate that as well. Give us a rating, a like, download, all that good stuff. Tell a friend, because next week we are doing a deep dive into the NCAA tournament. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to have at least 12 Big Ten teams to talk about in next week's NCAA tournament. And it's going to be an awesome, awesome time. This is what we do this for, Dalton, is for March. And we're going to get a little week off here, and then we're right back to it for the biggest time of the year next week in March Madness. Dalton, thanks so much for wading through the choppy waters of your internet. The car worked out terrific.
Look at the car.
Who would have thought? I hope that we can figure out other ways so you don't have to be in your car, but at least we know, hey, backup plan, Dalton's car has great internet.
I'm telling you, we're going to start a travel series where one of these times, next time we're on the plane, we could do the podcast from the plane. We could, if we play a Where's Dalton, this could be fun.
I can't imagine the two of us trying to work off of plain Wi-Fi for one of these. People would hear every fifth word that we had to say. That'd be something. Well, folks, enjoy the rest of your weeks. And next time we talk, we'll break down some brackets for you here on the Dribble Drive. For Dalton Shetler, I'm Austin Renner. Thanks for joining us. Give us a like, subscribe, and download. That all helps us to continue to grow here into the month of March. We'll talk to you guys next week for a bracket preview here on the Dribble Drive.